Super. All right, over to you then, Jean. You tell us what
Uh,
this is all about.
Hold on, I've just got to manage to get this slideshow to go. You should be able to see a slide.
Yeah, that's running.
Hi, my name is Jean Carletta, and I run an organization called HeatHack. Our mission is to help community building operators reduce their energy use and plan for a greener future. And just some preliminaries aside, we work in partnership with the Surefoot Effect, and green activists from the church might remember carbon conversations about 10, 15 years ago. That's one of their programs. And this program bears some resemblance to that, actually. And we're here because we're funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering's Ingenious Public Engagement Program, and very grateful for their support. They actually gave us the funds that helped us to develop the net zero workshops that we're going to deliver for the program that we're going to deliver for the SEC. So, why should you listen to me? I thought I should give you a little bit of background about myself. This cartoon is what an architect did, which kind of sums up my views of this area. So I have a university background in helping technologists understand why people can't use the systems that they build. And heating systems and buildings are just a kind of thing like that, really. I got really bored at work, so I took a year out and decided to find a way to be some actual use in the world. And one of the things I did was hang out in the building where I was in the choir, which is very pretty and kind of impractical. And it had some problems with the heating. So it had ridiculously high gas bills. It had three heating systems for three different main spaces. In the hall, the kids' parents at the children's nursery were forever getting called off work because they couldn't keep it at 16C, which is the Child Care Commission minimum. The church was stone cold on a Sunday morning, even though the gas bills were so high. And they got a kind of bungalowy thing out the back, and that was toasty warm. But that's actually because it had a miswired frost that was keeping it warm 24/7. So I learned a lot by just looking at this one church in conjunction with an engineer, because I knew nothing about heating in buildings at the time. But an engineer saw me looking at the radiators, and we kind of got together and solved what were actually some quite complex problems for them. So that kind of got me interested. So I went and I found an engineering academic, and we started running some building studies days and getting master's students into mostly church buildings to understand how they work and why they're so drafty and so cold. So what you can see here is a picture of the academic testing the airflow through an organ. This organ is below the tower, and it just dumps cold air so fast on the organist and the basses that it blows the music right off the choir stalls. And on the right, there's a picture of some students mounting some little temperature sensors that an electronics volunteer built for us to find out whether it's a lot warmer at the ceiling than it is where the people are. So we've kind of been in around 25 buildings. And I was learning a lot, and I felt I understood what was going on in these buildings, but we weren't having a lot of impact because we weren't influencing the people who make decisions in these buildings. So I started a new approach, and the net zero workshops that the SEC is running is based on that. So Paul mentioned the net zero action plan, and you may know about that, but if you don't worry. The only thing you really need to know is there are 10 areas for improvements that they've identified, and they call them petals. So that's why it looks a bit like a flower. And these net zero workshops, they address 2 of the 10. So it's energy efficiency improvements and clean energy. We don't address the other ones. That's not really our remit, but that's kind of the focus of what we're doing this year. And it's the practical things to do with energy use in the premises. And the other thing to know about this is the net zero workshops are new, but they're actually are rebranding and a light adaptation of a program that I've already been running for, about 18 months using the Royal Academy of Engineering funding. So it's been run in about 30 groups. We have those experiences to build on, and most of those groups are churches. There's even one or maybe two that are Scottish Episcopal Church congregations. So that Royal Academy of Engineering program runs until mid-February, and if you're quick, you can benefit from it. So it has some funding. I'll explain what the benefits are, but our net zero workshops run with that. So they're the same thing. To sign up for the net zero workshops this year, what you do is you go to the HeatHack website and you say, I want to do HeatHack and I'm from the Scottish Episcopal Church. And I'll give you the link for that at the end. But it's the same thing as what we've been running, but adapted for the Scottish Episcopal Church. So what are these workshops like? They take around 6 hours to complete. So that's either 2 3-hour sessions or 3 2-hour sessions. We usually do it as the 2-hour sessions, but we're thinking that some of you might prefer 3-hour ones. And it's for a small group of maybe 6 to 8 people. And the workshops are intended to do 3 things. They help you reason about what's right for your building. They help you document your reasoning for the professionals that are going to give you more solid advice, and for the grant funders that you're going to ask to pay for things. And this is very important documentation. And they give you a structure with icebreakers and activities and little topics to talk to each other about, which make you listen to each other and come to a consensus about what to do. And this is really, really important because otherwise you can't make change happen. You might say, well, why can't we do this stuff as part of our normal church structures? We're going to give this to our green group. We're going to give it to our property committee to do. It's really hard to make the changes that you need to make to address the green agenda and your futures properly using just those things, because the kinds of changes are it's hard to be ambitious for those groups to be ambitious enough. The kinds of changes that the program asks you to consider might be much more all-encompassing. Some of them deal with emotive issues. There are some hard choices involved. This is much more of a whole community thing. So, if it doesn't really fit into current church structures, then who should be in the group? So, as I said, 6 to 8 people. And what definitely doesn't work is groups that are made up of just the green activists acting independently of other people in the community. And what also doesn't work is if you press gang people to take part. So if there's anybody there, like this, reluctantly, 6 hours is not enough time to overcome those kinds of barriers and reach a consensus that's going to work. So you have to think a little bit carefully about this. Vestry needs to approve that you're doing this program, and they have to be interested in the results, because otherwise you're not going to have an impact. And maybe the most visible sign of doing that is having a vestry member there, because you need somebody who's that link with how decisions get made. But you at least need somebody who's well connected and will understand how decisions get made and what some of the practical considerations are and limitations are for the congregation. And beyond that, you just need to be a diverse set of people who are all going to look at this problem in different ways. And that means you should really look beyond your usual suspects. So you might want to involve somebody who's younger, or who has a disability, or is just underrepresented for some other reason in church decision-making processes. And actually, not everybody should be church members, in my view. A lot of our buildings are not that well occupied, and most churches think of their mission in terms of serving the community and getting more people through their building. So you want a building user who understands what the experiences are like for the people who hired your spaces. And you might also want somebody who understands the unmet needs in your local neighborhood, and that's not necessarily a church member. And what some of the churches involved in the program so far do is include somebody who's a complete outsider, maybe by inviting them from another local faith group, so they can bring completely fresh eyes to this building and how it serves the community. And then the last thing is that one person needs to be willing to take the lead in getting the dates when everybody's going to attend these meetings. And trust me, that is the hardest part of the whole program. And also in facilitating the group sessions. So as I said, they start with icebreakers and little discussions, and there's activities like a site survey, and just, keeping the time and running these things is an important contribution, that you need to find somebody who's willing to do that. And then there's one last thing, actually, which is you really, really want an engineer to be involved in your sessions. And that's going to seem like a strange requirement. If you want to be involved using our Royal Academy of Engineering funding, then this is a hard requirement. Otherwise, it's just something we really, really strongly recommend. And I want to explain why. The engineer does not need to know about buildings or heating. But what they do need to do is use their science brains to solve problems. And they're really, really good at that. And they're also practical. They're used to budgets and planning and thinking about risks. And what we find is that keeping an engineer involved helps you stay on track and keeps the whole thing grounded in reality. So, churches are used to seeking out volunteers with skills in management and in finance. And if I have one message for you to take away from this webinar, it's that engineers are just people with a skill that you should value like everybody else. And whenever you are doing anything to do with your buildings, you should seek out a volunteer with those engineering skills to help you. So when I reach this part, churches often say to me, "Oh, there's no way we can find an engineer." Look at the slide. These are some of the engineers who volunteered with us already, with their best Zoom faces on. So I apologize for some of the photos, but they're just people. They just live in your neighborhoods. If you can find a group, then you've got a set of people. And if your community wants to be involved in this program, then somebody will probably know an engineer. And so, churches say they can't find one, and then they're usually back within a bit and said, "Oh yeah, somebody knows so-and-so's married to, or works with, or lives next door to." And the engineers love this program because it's really eye-opening. A lot of them have never looked in these buildings in this way before. So some of them are actually paid by their companies to participate as part of their corporate and social responsibility programs, because their companies, which are building services companies, so they know a lot about buildings. They think this experience is valuable for everybody. And do tell us if you want to participate and you really can't find an engineer. We've got tips for how to do that. And we do try to help if you can't, but you have to look around yourself first. And trust me, you will find them. And we actually happen to have a spare engineer, or maybe two, in central Edinburgh at the moment. So sometimes we know of people that can help. Right. So that's about the groups. That tells you who needs to be in your group. What is the program actually like? Well, as I said, it's structured. So it tells you what to do in like 15-minute, half an hour slots, depending on what the activity is. And the core of the program is 2 games. So the first one, this is the secular version, but it looks like this. It's got a bunch of cards. It's a card game. And each card has an action on it that you can take. And some of them are really small actions. They're like put plastic pins in your thermostats and thermostatic radiator valves so nobody can turn them all the way up and all the way down. So that's a really small one. Some of them are really big, like getting a heat pump or getting your walls insulated. But they're all laid out on these cards. And in the game, you go around the room, and everybody can pick up a card, and then you think, what do we do with this? Is this something we should definitely do? Is this something that's definitely not for us because we've done it or because it's not appropriate for our situation? Or is it something we need more information about? And this forms the basis of a planning template. So this leads directly into the documentation that comes out at the end of the program. And it sounds simple, but we've been talking to Local Energy Scotland, which delivers the CARES funding grants. You might know about those. And they're interested in seeing the planning templates that come out of this because they think, sometimes with energy efficiency reports, it's really hard for the consultant to get a good idea of how you use the building or how you might use the building in future. And so it's hard for them to come up with advice that's going to be right for your situation. They just don't have enough time to think and query you about your future and your current use of the building to get everything right. And so the grant funder, wants to see these planning templates because they think that's really valuable. And they said possibly more valuable than the energy efficiency consultancy reports. So there's a big reason to do this because they find this compelling. And we're actually talking to them about working with a couple of groups as pilots for getting all the documentation right, because we don't have lots of the groups don't quite complete all of it. We don't have the templating quite right. But if they get it right, them saying that's a tick mark, that's good enough for us to believe your grant application is worthwhile. So big reason to play, right? And it's not done and dusted, but we are actually looking for pilot sites that want to go through that process with us and with Local Energy Scotland and us jointly. So that's one of the games, and that's the core of the planning. Here's an example of a card. So you can see a little bit more detail. This isn't exactly what the cards look like. This is just the web version of them. So this one, maintain buildings and keep them dry. This is actually the most important card in the entire action pack. Damp walls lose 1/3 more heat than dry walls. They make everybody feel less comfortable and they damage the building. And we've been told that churches often suffer damp problems because people stuff duvets up the wall vents trying to make the building lose warm air less fast. But it's like a misguided way of doing it in this case. So So, you can see these cards, they've got costs on a scale of 1 to 5. They've got how good they are for the environment on a scale of 1 to 5. And they've got some notion of what sustainability experts advise as the order in which to tackle things roughly. So, that makes it clear how to proceed with the planning, if you like. And we don't hide anything. You can see all of the cards online, and but we're still linking everything up to the secular version of the HeatHack program. So that HeatHack has a lot of background materials, and I'm still writing them as I go. And it's never a job that's going to get finished. But my entire goal here is to write down what you need to succeed. So you can see everything that we have, the session schedules or whatever, if you go both here and to the HeatHack website. So that was the first game, the card game. The second game looks more like a board game. And it does two things. It helps you think about unused spaces and why they aren't used. And it checks whether the building is warm at the times that the people are in. So the way this game works, it's not rocket science. You take a bunch of chess pieces or something, and you start Monday morning at 9 a.m. and move people around the building and just look at where they are and think, and think about what's happening in the building and what people's experiences are like. So this is usually done in the third session of the program, and at that point in the sessions, you should have some thermal monitoring data from devices that we give out, at least as part of the funding program. So I want to describe that a little bit. So the engineer, these devices, they send temperature and relative humidity readings to the web every 5 minutes if you have internet. If you don't, they save it to the device. And the ones on the left, we have an electronics volunteer build up. They cost about £5 in little electronic parts, and then a £5 battery. And so they're quite cheap. It's not as good as a commercial thing. I mean, it works fine, when it works, but it's not a commercial object. So some people, especially if they don't have internet, it's not a flawless experience always. You can actually use commercial loggers instead, and you might have to do that if you're not on the Royal Academy of Engineering funding. So you might be familiar with LASCAR data loggers. So they save temperature and relative humidity readings to a USB stick that you can plug into a computer. So we use these in session 3 during that board game to have the engineer, when you move the chess pieces into the hall to represent the children, he can tell you, oh yeah, and in the hall, it's now 12 degrees and the temperature reaches 16 degrees just as they're leaving, or whatever actually happens. And by the way, that's a really common situation to have. I always know when the engineers have just come out of the third session, because usually I get a phone call because it's a complete shocker. Nobody believes what they're seeing on the temperature traces. And it's just, this is my experience. This is the whole reason I set up the program. So the things that we found so far, we found a few places heating 2 halls whenever one is needed, or heating an entire church when they just need an office warm. We find heating overrides left on, like used when people aren't in the building for long enough to benefit from turning the heating on. So a really slow heating system, and they're only there for half an hour, but they still turn the heating system on. And sometimes they leave it on until somebody else remembers to turn it off. We found a wedding from the previous year that was still bringing the heating on once a week. People bringing in space heaters because another group turns the thermostats down before they come in. These are really, really common experiences. We'd like to stop them. They're nothing to be embarrassed about. The best places have them, but this is you need to start looking for these things because this is the low-hanging fruit. Sometimes you can trim your gas use by a quarter through just doing something that costs a couple of £100 to fix these things. And we have fixes for all these problems. It sounds shocking, but the installers that we use, they just don't think about how to choose controls for the kind of situations that we have in our buildings. And actually in a lot of the SEC buildings, because I've been in and out of a lot of them, you can tell that they just nipped off to Screwfix and bought something that you should be putting in a house, not a church hall. So unlike many green programs, we're not just about the big stuff like heat pumps. We want to stop the really bad wastes. Meanwhile, because we know it's going to take time to do the big transformations. So they're both part of the program. So I want to just now talk a little bit about worship spaces because they're kind of a special case. And what I'm going to tell you is really part of the first session in HeatHack. And it's some of the key concepts. And this is as technical as it gets. So let's see how this goes. When you think about how we heat our worship spaces, most of us are trying to heat our churches the same way we heat our houses. So we've got radiators, they're warming up the air. We're getting that air warm and we're trying to hold it inside the building. And the building's leaky. I mean, we know that, right? So everybody knows from the advice for homes to keep that warm air in and use this gas efficiently, we need to draft proof, we need to improve the windows, we need to insulate. But in a lot of these spaces, that's really, really difficult. But for worship spaces, they're often only used once or twice a week. And it's even worse for us than it is in like a stone in a house, because the building is working against us in this case. So most of the buildings are stone. Stone takes a lot of energy to warm up, so it's really slow. You have to turn the heating on way, way ahead. And actually, the way we run our heating systems, the stone itself typically never gets warm. So stone is great for 24/7 occupation of a building. Once it's warm, it stays warm. It kind of evens out the temperature differences between day and night. And if you're putting heat into it all the time, then the stone builds up that energy. But it's terrible for heating a few times a week because it just stays cold. And actually, if you're looking for a grant to do works to decarbonize your heating, nobody's interested in funding a space that's not highly used. So there's a real issue about thinking about how we heat these spaces and what the right next step is. We do want them comfortable. So we have to go back to basics, and this is what we do in the first session, and think about what actually makes people comfortable. So air temperature is one part of it, but the average temperature of the surfaces around you are actually just as important, and that's why these stone buildings feel so cold. Radiant heaters is a solution that just heats the people by increasing the average temperature of the surrounding surfaces, or contact with warm surfaces like heated seat cushions. They also help to make people feel more comfortable even despite the air temperature being cold. Okay. And we're a little bit behind thinking about these things. So there's an entire diocese in England that's discussing radiant chandeliers. I don't think we're even really aware of them up here. They don't glow. They cost a lot less to run than a gas heating system. And there's lots of heated seat cushion options that the Church of England is looking at. It's everything from like the kind you might take to a football game to the really nice pew cushions that they use in Trier Cathedral or some other really posh churches. And one of the goals of the program is to develop local examples of these things. So we don't have a lot of things locally that we can see. And I know that seeing is believing for these technologies, but the aim is to figure out how we can do something if we're going to just use a space a few times a week. How we can do it without trying to keep that warm air in the building, because it's just not the right way to make people comfortable in these circumstances. And heat pumps are a good fit to part of this, because if you can use a heat pump 24/7, which is kind of like how they're designed, then you can use them to just keep the building a bit warm all the time, and then top up by other measures, maybe. And that's probably a better strategy than, well, that is a better strategy than what we're doing at the moment. So the church community and conservation architects haven't really come to complete agreement about the right things for the right for different situations. So this is kind of evolving thoughts about how to do these things, but we need to get there quicker. And as I said, that's one of the goals of the program, and to spread information about good practice elsewhere. So that's the introduction of the program. Ask